This idea of control makes me think about some of the ways that these ideas have made their way into the political mainstream,
Yes.
right? And the sort
Yeah.
of the post-Roe landscape, and I'm
Yes.
thinking about people like JD Vance who espouse a very particular kind of masculinity. So what are the ramifications of this ideology, this world coming into our politics and for our democracy and the
Yeah.
institutions that comprise it?
Yeah. Well, when we're talking about a kind of defense of the patriarchy, if you will, right, which is the patriarchy is a power structure that ultimately that gives more power and control to men at the hands of other men and who don't adhere to the norms and women. And that defense of the patriarchy is done through kind of sexist attitudes, but also through misogynistic actions and behaviors. And those are kind of the law enforcement mechanisms that I'm talking about here that are defending the patriarchy with either legal means or social norms and control and attempts to belittle, dehumanize, or enact violence against women and the LGBTQ community, and in some cases, boys and men who don't adhere to those
Mhm.
norms through bullying, through slurs like "you throw like a girl," or gender policing that puts boys and men in their place if they don't adhere, right, to these kind of macho norms. All of that, one, is a defense of the gender binary, right? Really trying to make sure that we adhere to very fixed ideas of men and women, and that there are very clear rules for being men and women and boys and girls that have to be adhered to and have to be policed. And that filters into an idea that of submissiveness and control, of power, and of the execution of that power and who should hold it. That bleeds into things like reproductive rights,
Mhm.
same-sex marriage rights, voting rights. When you start hearing people calling for one household, one vote,
Mhm.
when you hear people arguing that women shouldn't have the right to vote, and, that go back again to what my mom faced, and women of that generation, even privileged white women who went to college, right, had no right to open a bank account or a credit card without their husband until, in her case, she had 3 children already in the mid '70s. So those are the kinds of rights that we take, in all honesty, my generation takes completely for granted. I can't even imagine a world where I couldn't open a bank account without a man's signature. But it was not that long ago that that was the case. And so those are the kinds of rights and the legal
Mhm.
restrictions that are forms of control. But there's also social forms of control that I'm talking about in this book.
Yeah, and on that idea of kind of the economics of it all, I have to say, as I was reading this, I thought a lot about the connection to globalization and the push toward white collar work away from blue collar types of jobs. I went to high school in the early 2000s, and at that point, like if you went to the Vo-Tech, as we called it, like you were a loser, right? You were
Yeah,
at the
right.
bottom of the social status, and I mean, I would think that like that foments some kind of feeling of wanting revenge or feeling like you're
Yeah.
at a loss or something like that, and so when Andrew Tate comes along, it's like, "Oh, he's speaking to those
Yeah, and
feelings."
Andrew Tate, he opens every single video saying men are suffering and I'm the only one who will talk about it. And to be honest, he was right for a long time. Like, I think we're getting better at talking about the problems that men and boys face, but you do have to, and I tried really hard in this book to emphasize that these are real problems. Sometimes they're perceived grievances, but there are also real problems. Men have 3/4 of the deaths of despair in this country, which is suicides, overdoses, deaths by alcohol. 40% of college attendance now, or graduation
Mhm.
rather, there's massive loss of traditionally male jobs. So when you're talking about that kind of economics of that, what it intersects with though is a culture of masculinity, right? That is sometimes called man box culture, that says that men are failures if they're not providers and
Mhm.
protectors. And if that provider role in that culture is then removed, it makes sense that the protector role, which is a little bit more violent or ready to be violent role, right? That idea of dominance and aggression as hallmarks of masculinity being a part of that is going to surge. And that's what we've seen. And so,
Mhm.
but instead of addressing the fact that the provider role, A, is part of an imposed cultural norm that maybe was never fair to begin with, and B, is being removed because of the loss of traditionally male jobs without structural replacement or opportunities to retrain in careers that are thriving, and sometimes in part because of gendered norms about things like nursing or
Mhm.
caregiving, where there's surges in hiring, but men are not following in scale. So, that those things are real, but instead of addressing the structural things, we're scapegoating instead women feminists and others for taking our place, for making it too hard for men, or for going too far, right? This idea
Mhm.
that women's rights have gone too far, which like surprising percentage of men in this country believe now. I don't have it in front of me, but it's
Mhm.
cited in the book. It's like half in some cases of the demographic.
Could they, like, name what specifically those rights are, do you think? Or is it just women's rights just as kind of a
Yeah,
general
I think
vibe?
I think in general, it's this sense that circulates online, often that, women are getting a leg up, are getting ahead, they
Mhm.
get an advantage, everything's easier for them, they're, like, more likely to get the interview, that they get promoted, that it's everything's hard, and I've heard people say this, like, educated, well-educated, informed people say, "My son can't get a job because all
Mhm.
these other people are in line ahead of him," basically. And I think
Mhm.
that that sense, even if statistically it's still actually not true when you look at pay rates, et cetera, there's a strong sense that white boys and men are
Mhm.
discriminated against now in the job market. And that kind of narrative at the hands of feminist immigrants, people of color, others. And so that's the kind of scapegoating. And then this idea that women's rights have gone too far, does come on the heel of decades of girls can code, girls on the run, like
Mhm.
trying to promote girls' access to things where they had been excluded, while not thinking about how do we maybe capitalize on helping boys also um, have opportunities to experience a fuller range of human emotions and capacity and focus on their well-being and not just on their sense sometimes they get, as I've heard from boys and men my whole career, that they feel like people see them as inherently dangerous or bad.
Mm. Well, yeah, and on that kind of the boys and men problem, I'm thinking a lot about Richard Reeves, who started the
Yes,
Institute for Boys and Men, and that
exactly.
kind that gets some eye rolls
Yeah.
sometimes, right? And people are like, "We've been talking about boys and men for time immemorial. Why do we need to kind of focus on that?"
I get that too. People get angry sometimes in the audience, women in particular, when I start saying this because they say, like, well, and it's true, women are still paid less. They still, receive the bulk of violence directed in sexual assaults. And, not to boys that are also bullied and harmed at the hands of older men and their families, but not at the same rates of girls in terms of sexual assault, the likelihood of being raped in your life, the safety issue, the unequal pay issue, the lack of opportunities, the challenges of caregiving, of no parental leave, to speak of, the cost of childcare, all of which drives women out of the labor market at higher rates than men at key points in their career. All of those things are true, and you can still have an emerging problem of boys and men that shows they're backsliding and going down, even if it doesn't mean things are worse for them than for women. It's like a both and problem, not an either or problem. And so
Right.
that's what I try to say.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to me that the solutions then need to be both and as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't. I mean, it's, Richard Reeves Center, Equimundo, like these organizations that have been really focusing on boys and men's wellness. Governor Newsom in California just passed an executive order that has real effort, and I think in Maryland too, there's new efforts on to look at boys and men. I mean, those solutions have to be there. They shouldn't take the place of efforts to promote, protect, and safeguard girls and women, particularly at a moment when we're also seeing the highest rates of online misogyny and things like sex toys being thrown at WNBA players during basketball games, right? Like this is there that problem hasn't gone away, and in fact in documented ways has also gotten worse. But those solutions have to address both types of problems.